You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com. Welcome to the big show, my family and friends. We certainly appreciate you guys stopping by and doing all the good stuff that's out there. We've got an amazing guest on the show today, and I've been really excited. I got to tell you, there's very few books, and I read a lot of books, of course, as you probably know, since we have so many great authors on the show. But starting sometime yesterday in the morning, I started reading this book, and I have been enthralled with it. I'm on like chapter, I think, 25. And I just can't put it down. I'm just sucked into it. And it's probably one of the most exhaustive, detailed reports, documents. It's one of the most documented things I think I've ever read about Timothy McVeigh and right-wing extremism and some of the roots of where it came from. And so we're going to get into some of that today. And I think you're going to learn a lot. And the connection of it to January 6th and some of the things that we deal with challenges every day in our environment and our politics in America here. Lately, you may have heard some things. There's kind of some things going on. Anyway, he is the author of the latest book that just came out, May 2nd, 2023, Homegrown, Timothy McVeigh and the Rise of Right-Wing Extremism. Jeffrey Toobin joins us on the show. He'll be talking to us about his amazing book that he's authored about the definitive account of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. And Jeffrey is the New York Times bestselling author of American Harris, The Oath, The Nine, Inside the Secret World of the Supreme Court, Too Close to Call, A Vast Conspiracy, The Run of His Life, The People versus O.J. Simpson, and Opening Arguments, a magnum cum laude. Is it laude or laude?
You can say it either way. Latin is not my first language, so I can't really say for sure. But I think loud is the way it's usually referred to.
Loud. I flunked second grade. That's a callback joke we do on the show. But Jeffrey's smarter than I am because he is a magna cum laude graduate of Harvard Law School, where he lives, and he lives with his family in New York. Welcome to the show, Jeffrey. How are you?
Hi, Chris. I'm great.
So give us any .coms. Where do you want people to follow you on the interwebs in the sky?
The best place to follow me is I was going to say Twitter, but are you allowed to say Twitter anymore?
I don't know.
Or is it called?
Do we know
X
what it's called
now?
this week?
I don't know. It's at Jeffrey Toobin.
There you go.
At whatever Mr. Musk is calling it at the moment.
There you go. Those of you watching this 5 to 10 years from now, I always get the weird comments on YouTube. This is the week that Twitter turned it to X. And of course, as you probably know, 10 years from now, I'd file bankruptcy next year. So anyway, I'm gonna get the comments on YouTube 10 years from now. It never fails. So Jeffrey, welcome to the show. Congratulations on the new book. You've written a lot of books. What motivated you want to write this one?
Well, as my dad liked to say, to make a long story unbearable, this is the story behind Homegrown. Back in 1997. I covered the trials of McVeigh and Nichols. The bombing was in 95. The trials were separated. They were moved to Denver, change of venue. And I covered both of them. And I was fascinated by the story even then. But, life moved on. I didn't write a book about it. But the story had been rattling around in my head for a very long time. What really prompted me to return to the story was in October of 2020, as I'm sure you remember, the FBI arrested a group of people who were plotting to kidnap the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. And I got very interested in that case, and I saw that the suspects, who have subsequently been convicted, were all affiliated with the Michigan militia. Now, I knew that Terry Nichols, who was the second defendant, the lesser defendant in the Oklahoma City bombing case, was also affiliated with the Michigan militia. And I was wondering about the connections, and I saw that not only were there ideological similarities between the McVeigh, Nichols era militias and today. But some of the same people were actually involved. So I started looking into that. And then just a few weeks later, January 6th happened, the riot at the Capitol. And again, I saw the ideological similarities between the 90s and the 2020s. And I decided to take a look, recognizing that there had never really been a good comprehensive book about the Oklahoma City bombing. And it seemed especially relevant to me because of the ideological ties I saw between then and now.
There you go. You know, that's the thing I really loved about the book is the parallels that you took and ran between the two, and some of the same influences, some of the same radicalization, some of the different organizations are out there, the mindset of a lot of the same people. You know, you talk in the book about, you know, Timothy LaVey's sort of short-term thinking mindset is the same as what goes into the January 6th people. And you paint a very, I mean, the book is incredibly detailed. It's almost, I'm surprised you didn't, you know, tell me what everyone ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's that detailed, but it makes it very engaging to where you're deeply sucked into it because you have all the information and you're just like, I just need to know a little bit more.
Well, it's nice of you to say, Chris, but I hit pay dirt in a research area that I didn't expect, and as someone who's covered crime and trials for a long time, I'd never had this kind of opportunity. Stephen Jones, McVeigh's lawyer, after the trial, donated all of his records from the case, all of his interviews with McVeigh, all of his background interviews, McVeigh's letters, all of the discovery, the FBI interviews that was turned over by the government to the defense, to the Briscoe Center at the University of Texas. 635 boxes, a million documents. And I'd never had a resource like that. And this is why I was able to write in such detail, I hope not tedious detail, but vivid detail about who McVeigh was and what motivated him, because I had this extraordinary access to the documents that and videos and audio that was at the University of Texas. This story is in part about politics, about the ideological evolution of right-wing extremism, but it's also a true crime story. I mean, it is the story of how McVeigh and Nichols, through, a kind of evil genius, pulled off something that was actually very difficult to pull off, and how they assembled the bomb, how they financed the bomb, how they delivered the bomb. All of that is really a true crime story that the likes of which I certainly had never seen before.
And it's amazing too, because I mean they're almost like a bunch of bungling idiots, everyone that plays in this thing, but they have this ideological ideologue sort of slant, and it's interesting. A lot of the same influences, Rush Limbaugh, and all those things played into it. For those of people who don't remember much about what went on back then with the bombings, tell us why this is an important event in American history, if you would.
Okay, let's just talk about like what happened. Mm-hmm. I think because I've been so steeped in this, and a lot of people do remember it. It's important for me to recognize that a lot of people either weren't alive or weren't conscious and just didn't know much about this. On April 19th, 1995, 28 years ago, Timothy McVeigh pulled up to a little inlet on the driveway in the sidewalk in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, and he lit a fuse and then walked away. And about 5 minutes later, a bomb with 5,000 pounds of fertilizer in the back blew up about a third of the building. A tremendous, tremendous explosion. 168 people were killed, including 19 children. As many people may remember, there was a daycare center on the second on the second floor of the Murrah building, and 11 of the 19 children who were killed had been in that daycare center. And it was at that time widely described as the worst terrorist act in American history. That's a debatable proposition, and certainly it was surpassed by 9/11 6 years later. But it was a transformative event in American history, and one that I think has been overshadowed over the years, in part by 9/11, but also by just the passage of time. And what I sought to do in Homegrown was to show why the story was still relevant today, as well as telling the true crime story of how it all went down.
There you go. And would you say that some of the same influences are still kicking around? I mean, I think you detail in the book that, it's even worse now with the propagation of the internet, because back then, they couldn't find other people, other idiots to run around with. So, but now it's probably much worse in the danger, I suppose.
The internet is a big part of the evolution of this story. Tim McVeigh wanted to start a right-wing revolution in this country, and he told his lawyers in a phrase that always sticks with me: "I knew there was an army out there, but I just couldn't find them." And he did look. He would go to gun shows and try to talk to people, but he didn't have the personality to recruit others. And it's my belief that no one else other than Terry Nichols was really involved in the bombing conspiracy. But the big difference is, but he was right, I think, that there was an army out there. But once you had the internet, that allowed this broader radicalization and mobilization. And as you look at the right-wing violence of subsequent years, whether it was the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer, which was organized over private Facebook groups, or the mass shootings in El Paso, or in Pittsburgh at the synagogue, or at the church in South Carolina, or the rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017, all of that was both organized and motivated by what people saw on the internet and on social media. And that's why the story is more pressing than ever, because those ideas are in faster and easier circulation than they've ever been before because of the internet.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here with a little station break. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. We'll resume here in a second. I'd like to invite you to come to my coaching, speaking, and training courses website. You can also see our new podcast over there at chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Over there, you can find all the different stuff that we do for speaking engagements if you'd like to hire me, training courses that we offer, and coaching for leadership, management, entrepreneurism, podcasting, corporate stuff. With over 35 years of experience in business and running companies as CEO. And be sure to check out chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Now back to the show. Yeah, I think there's a comedian who says the problem with the internet now is the idiots can find each other. When we used to just kind of put them in an asylum or send them off, throw them out of the tribe as you would. Now they can all the stupid people can find each other and congregate. QAnon, excuse me. Excuse me. So, what's interesting, what I really loved about the book was the detail of it. And you really paint a profile from just the very young age, his parents, his upbringing, the strife at home. To my understanding, if I read your book correctly, the mother abandonment, strife issues that caused him to have some real issues with women, his mother. One thing I've seen over the course of my life, especially being single, is the impact of how much, a childhood's, what's the word I'm looking for? Imprint from their parents, divorce, strife, trauma can shape their whole lives.
You're so right that, trying to tease out, what were the motivations that McVeigh had that led him to do this monstrous act. mean, you put your finger on some of them. He grew up outside Buffalo in a town called Lockport, where his father worked at a GM plant for 30 years, and his grandfather worked at the same GM plant for 30 years. That plant was in terminal decline by the time McVeigh came along. So there was economic uncertainty. It wasn't that McVeigh was poor, but his hold on the middle class was very tenuous. He became obsessed with guns, and that's something that is central, very, very much central to this story. That the guns were the main interest in his life. His parents had a very ugly divorce. He never had any real success with women. In fact, today, I think we would probably call McVeigh an incel, an involuntary celibate, which is a sort of self-described group of men who are very angry at women. He joined the army and was a successful soldier, but was also affected by the racial polarization in the army. As you said, he became a very dedicated listener to Rush Limbaugh. If you look at each of these individual categories, it's important to point out, most vets don't commit terrible crimes. Most Rush Limbaugh listeners don't commit crimes. Most people from broken homes don't commit crimes. But when you get the totality of these influences and what I think is just a twisted, frankly, evil character, all of that added up to what Tim McVeigh became.
I want to say the perfect formula, but I wouldn't call it the imperfect formula. Maybe I wouldn't want to call it perfect just to give it any nuance of being glorious, but the perfect storm maybe. The part of your book I was reading in the middle of the night when I go to the gym. I got to the part where you talked about the victims of the thing, and you almost made me start bawling in the gym. It was moving to read that part of the book. And the famous photo that everyone's seen, but it told the story and the humanity of that experience for what people went through, and I thought that was moving and a good reminder for people to remember about.
Well, I struggled with how to do that, because when you have 168 deaths, it's difficult to convey that sort of magnitude. As you saw, I have a chapter where I have, I pick a few representative stories, including the death of Bailey Allman as the baby who died in the famous photograph that you mentioned in the firefighter's arms, and one of the dramatic rescues of someone who was trapped in the rubble, and a woman who was sitting at her desk surrounded by 5 colleagues, and the 5 colleagues just fell away in front of her, and they all died, though she survived. And one of the things I always tried to keep in mind was that, each one of those stories was a terrible tragedy. And one little fact, which was always meaningful to me, one question I had in reporting the book, kind of an obvious question, is we all know 168 people were killed. Or how many people were injured? Well, no one knows for sure, and there's an interesting reason why. Because the people of Oklahoma City, and particularly the people who were injured, recognized that hospitals were going to be overwhelmed. So a lot of people tried to take care of their injuries themselves, or they went to private doctors, or they didn't want to burden hospitals, which I thought was such a selfless act. So there is no, single number. It's probably in the 300 or 400 range of people who were injured. But I always thought that was a great tribute to the people of Oklahoma City, especially the people who were in the Murrah building, that they had the selflessness not to burden hospitals and tried to take care of themselves in the aftermath, if they could leave the building on their own steam.
There you go. And it was you detail about how, we came together as Americans. I think the big significant too of the Timothy story and the bombing it's one of several big events in our nation's history, at least my life. I think maybe that's why I feel impacted by it, and maybe most Americans too. But it was that moment that something happened that was so extraordinary on our own soil, and you knew when you woke up the next morning that life would never be the same. After 9/11, all the different things that have happened to us over the years, you knew that we were never going to be the same. We were going to live in a completely different world, and new generations would never know what it's like to go to the airports, for instance, without being patted down, right?
Right. And one of the things about writing relatively recent history is you don't remember, I certainly didn't remember, all the stuff that's going on at the same time, and the fact that it has influences. For example, in the bombing was April of 1995. In January of 1995, the O.J. Simpson criminal case started. In fact, on April 19th, I was in Lance Ito's courtroom in Los Angeles covering the trial. But that had an influence. Merrick Garland, who was the Justice Department official, now the Attorney General, who was in charge of the investigation, wanted an investigation and trial that was completely different from the O.J. Simpson case. He didn't want a circus. He wanted a very narrowly tailored, not media frenzy case. And that approach, I think, has also shaped his tenure as Attorney General. He has been relatively press averse as an Attorney General, perhaps to a fault. Another thing that people may not remember was that in the mid 90s, in this period, it was also when the Unabomber was mailing bombs across the country and killing people. And in fact, Merrick Garland was taken off the O.J. Simpson investigation. He was taken off the Oklahoma City investigation to try to catch the Unabomber, who was eventually caught the following year in 1996. But because of the proximity between the Unabomber and McVeigh, they've often been kind of linked together as lone wolves and anti-government, which was true of Ted Kaczynski, but not true of McVeigh. McVeigh was not a lone wolf. He was part of a movement. He was also not anti-government. He was against Bill Clinton's government in the 1990s. So I think, putting things in the historical context, even though the 1990s aren't ancient history, I think it's important to recognize, what was really going on in the 90s at the same time as the bombing.
There you go. And you paint a wonderful profile of him, especially over his history, that you see in the same with January 6th. You see other people who are radicalized. We talked about incels, people who do school shootings, things of that nature, the messianic sort of attitudes and mindset they have. When I was reading the introduction of your book, and you were talking about how, Timothy felt like, this was his purpose. And I'm like, but you're going to kill children. Like how, I don't think they killed children in the Revolutionary War.
Well, I mean, it's just her. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But he was a fanatic. And the three main links I saw between McVeigh and particularly January 6th. The first was an absolute obsession with guns. This idea that you had to act to prevent the federal government from taking your guns away. I think a lot of people may remember that McVeigh set off the bomb on April 19th, 1995, because it was the second anniversary of the disastrous FBI raid at Waco on the Branch Davidian compound there. And that's true. But he was also just as equally motivated by something that happened on September 14th, 1994, which was when Bill Clinton signed the assault weapons ban. That was when he was absolutely frenzied by the idea that the government would take his guns away. Same thing with the January 6 people. The other similarity is that they both believed violence was justified in support of their cause. And the third, which was the most interesting and surprising to me, was this weird obsession with the American Revolution. The idea that because the patriots of 1776 rebelled violently against the British, we, the gun believers of 1995 or 2021, we have the obligation and the right to rebel against the evil federal government. And the prologue to my book is called 1776 because so many of the January 6th rioters, including some of the leaders, associated themselves with the American Revolution. And McVeigh had memorized much of the Declaration of Independence, not just the famous part, the opening part, we hold these truths to be self-evident, but the later part where Jefferson is justifying the rebellion against the British. That's how McVeigh saw himself as an heir of the patriots of the American Revolution, as did the January 6 rioters.
And what's interesting, you talk about how they were influenced by Waco, by Ruby Ridge, all these different events, and you see how that's still playing out today. Those influencers are those people that, there's probably a psychological word for it, that use those sort of events as operations for their violence. The Bundys, the Bundy Ranch thing. Their big thing was what Ruby Ridge, Waco, Texas, all those sort of events, and it's still playing out today. And I think that's what makes it a higher danger.
And there are dog whistles today. I mean, it is not a coincidence that Donald Trump had his first rally of his 2024 campaign in Waco, because Waco has become a symbol of the evil federal government that needs to be disciplined or overturned. As you point out, the Bundy Ranch, the Bundy Ranch people, and the book that inspired McVeigh was this novel called The Turner Diaries, about a right-wing rebellion that leads to the overthrow of the evil federal government. That too was read and inspired many of the January 6 rioters. So, I mean, the links are not hard to find.
Yeah, and he gets the idea, Timothy does, to do the bombing of a federal building based off of that.
He does. I mean, the Turner Diaries is really it's a horrible book, but it's very vivid. It's about how it's a novel. The conceit of which is that the federal government has been taken over by an evil cabal of blacks and Jews. And the first thing they do is they pass a law called the Cohen Act, very subtle there, that calls for the confiscation of all private firearms. Earl Turner, who's the narrator and the hero of the book, gets a truck, fills it with fertilizer and fuel oil, sets it by the FBI building in Washington, and blows up the building, killing about 700 people. McVeigh very explicitly modeled what he did on what Earl Turner did in the Turner Diaries. In the book, it led to a full-fledged civil war against the evil federal government, and that's what McVeigh wanted. Fortunately, that didn't happen.
And you see this theme throughout all these guys. We're going to start a race war. We're going to start a civil war. The Jews will not replace us bit in Charlottesville. There was the young kid who shot up the Baptist church. He thought he was going to, they all think they're going to start like a race war and they're going to awaken everything. But anyway, I love the book. It's so detailed. It almost reads like a screenplay. And when I read it, it felt like I was watching a movie. You detail what he was going through in his cell when he was just pulled over and booked for, I think, a bad license plate.
Well, there's a limited series in the works if the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild strike ever ends. I have lots of reasons to want the strike to end.
There you go. Well, but they can make an AI of you and just put you in there. I think that's what Hollywood's trying to do.
I think that's. I want people to watch. No one wants to watch an AI of me, I'm sure.
Yeah, they'll just put you in one of those Futurama tanks, head tanks, and put you in there. So,